How many kinds of evaluation are there? I took on that question in teaching an evaluation theory course, which led to a video on my YouTube channel looking at a panorama of evaluation approaches, which identified and presented 101 evaluation options and counting. As a result of that, I received a number of emails and queries asking, how do you work with intended users and stakeholders with so many options, and why are there so many kinds of evaluation? How did the choices get so complicated? This video takes on that question. I'll try to explain, based on my 50 years of experience watching these new approaches emerge, why they emerged and how they emerged. We begin with different kinds of evaluation for different purposes. Product evaluation, to evaluate refrigerators, computers, cars. Personnel evaluation, to evaluate people. Organizational evaluations, to improve evaluation effectiveness, like Peter Senge's classic book on the art and practice of the learning organization. This video focuses on program evaluation, ways of improving the effectiveness of programs and making judgments about what programs do. That is affected by the location and the role of the evaluator. There are evaluation consultants who approach things in a certain way. There are internal evaluators. There are major independent evaluation offices in international agencies, philanthropic foundations, government units. There are joint evaluations carried out by multiple evaluators and evaluation agencies, as in the international response to conflict and genocide lessons from the Rwanda experience. There are external evaluators, what came to be known over the years as outhouse evaluation. And so how the evaluation is done, where the evaluator is located, what's being evaluated, begin the process of determining different kinds of evaluation. But the real issue turns out to be one of values, value variations. Scriven's classic definition of evaluation as the process of determining the merit, worth, and value of things focuses on the value. What values determine judgments that are made? And it turns out that different evaluation approaches are undergirded by different values. That's what I want to emphasize. Most approaches to describing differences in evaluations focus on each one as an autonomous type with certain perspective and methods and approach. But to really understand why there are so many and how they emerged, we have to look at them in relation to each other, because each new evaluation approach is a response to the way things are currently being done and believing that they have a new way to deal with some of the issues that the old way doesn't handle adequately. And that judgment is a matter of different values, different emphases, different things that evaluators care about and think are important. And so we're going to look at 10 different kinds of value-based approaches to evaluation and use a values framework to understand how these different approaches have emerged and what it looks like to see them in relationship to each other. 10 competing and alternative paradigm evaluation perspectives. Begin with the distinction between an evaluation that seeks definitive answers to evaluation questions versus those that take as their priority honoring diverse perspectives. Those seeking definitive answers ask the overall summative question, does the program work? Those honoring diverse perspectives ask a different question. What are the perceptions of what works, for whom, in what ways, under what conditions? And they don't expect to come up with a single answer. They don't expect there to be one truth. In the logic of evaluation, formulated by Scriven, making an evaluation and a judgment involves establishing criteria, constructing standards for the criteria, measuring performance against those criteria, and synthesizing an overall judgment of merit, worth, and significance. For those who seek a definitive answer, they're looking for the best they can get at towards through measurement. Experimental evaluations look to determine if the program activities can actually be attributed to the outcomes. To what extent is that the case? Impact evaluations look for a definitive answer about the effectiveness and attribute. The Strategic Impact Evaluation Fund, for example, uses experimental methods like randomized controlled trials and quasi-experimental methods that estimate the impact and cost effectiveness of government and NGO programs. Esther Duflo was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics for her work in experimental evaluations. What those approaches have in common is seeking definitive answers about what works and doesn't work. In contrast to those who seek a definitive answer are those evaluators who focus on multiple perceptions and multiple kinds of data to give diverse answers to the question of what works, expecting that there will be different understandings and conclusions and judgments depending upon where one stands in relationship to the program and what one's experiences are with the program. An example is the constructivist evaluation advocated by Egon Guba and Ivana Lincoln that called for evaluators to gather multiple perspectives and work with beneficiaries and participants in programs to capture their diverse perspectives and put them into dialogue with each other to understand different ways in which people experience and perceive a program. Robert Stake's responsive evaluation began by gathering multiple perspectives from different stakeholders about what questions were important to them. Interpretist evaluation involves making sense of the different experiences and interpretations and honoring and valuing those diverse perspectives. Seville Kushner's personalizing evaluation focuses on understanding the individual in the program and their context and experience with the program instead of making the program itself the centerpiece. And so here we have a set of competing and contrasting values and beliefs. Those who are using program evaluation to inform a truth about whether the program works through objectivity, independence, neutrality, operationalism, that is clear definitions, randomized controlled trials, measurement, and reaching definitive answers. In contrast to those who are seeking diverse perceptions and understandings, who value subjectivity of different people with different values, see themselves as interdependent with the beneficiaries in a relationship, apply a value lens, look for natural variation instead of average effects through in-depth case studies and qualitative in-depth interviews to get at socially constructed diversity. These are fundamentally different ways of going about the work of evaluation. They answer different questions for different funders with different values, and they provide different insights into how programs function. Second value distinction is between the emphasis on evaluator independence and rendering independent judgments versus participatory approaches, co-creation, participatory engagement of participants. And so Michael Scriven, for example, has asserted that bad is bad and good is good, and it is the job of evaluators to decide which is which. Evaluators render judgments. Connoisseurship evaluation, developed by Elliot Eisner, viewed the evaluator as an expert with knowledge of whatever was being evaluated, and that expertise was what determined the value and credibility of the evaluator's judgments. Independent evaluation offices are expected to render independent judgments, and the emphasis is on their independence and their judgments. The credibility, validity, and assumptions in program evaluation, then, are about what makes for credibility and validity, and independence is one major answer to that question, versus the co-creation and collaborative approaches recommended by others as a way to ensure that the evaluation has credibility from the perspective of program participants. So there are collaborative approaches to evaluation, interactive evaluation approaches, inclusive evaluation that Donna Mertens and her colleagues have formulated to involve multiple stakeholders and voices that aren't traditionally heard, multivocal evaluation, interpersonal evaluation. Those advocating evaluation independence as a source of credibility and evaluator judgments are focusing on methods and the credibility of methods. Those involved in collaborative participatory approaches emphasize the facilitation and the coaching of participants in programs. The skills needed then include communication skills, conflict resolution, negotiating, listening, group facilitation, cultural competence to engage diverse participants in the evaluation process. A third point of contention is the difference between evaluations that focus on describing outcomes and those that focus on explaining outcomes, presenting findings versus explaining. This is a major division in the field. So in the descriptive tradition are the goals-based approaches, SMART goals, where you're describing whether or not goals are attained. Peter Drucker's management by objectives is aimed at describing whether or not objectives were fulfilled. Discrepancy evaluation, early in the field, looked at describing the difference between what were the aspirations of a program and what was actually attained. Performance measurement simply describes the levels of performance on key indicators. Performance management and evaluation is about describing the results. The Sustainable Development Goals are basically 17 goal areas with some 180 individual goals within those categories and some 212 indicators that are aimed at describing progress on the goals. Results-based management, RBM, is a descriptive process of reporting what's been achieved. Key performance indicators, KPIs, describe levels of achievement. Implementation evaluation describes what's been implemented. It's a descriptive process. In M&E, the monitoring data are primarily descriptive. What are the patterns? What are the trends? Then there are those evaluators who go beyond description to ask why. Attribution versus contribution. Why are the data showing up? What's the difference has the program made? So that these evaluations look at causal attribution, they look at contribution analysis, but they move into theory as a basis for explanation. Theory-driven evaluations. Carol Weiss famously introduced theories of change into evaluation under the admonition that nothing is as practical as a good theory. The Purposeful Program Theory book by Fennell and Rogers lays out how to do program theory. Stuart Donaldson's work on program theory-driven evaluation science. All of these approaches are focused on explaining results. Realistic evaluation focuses on identifying the mechanisms in programs that lead to changes, explaining how those changes come about. A presentation at the 2022 European Evaluation Society demonstrated the increased attention to causal mechanisms in program evaluation, especially through theory-based evaluations and realist evaluations. And so a major difference in how people and evaluators view the function of evaluation is whether it's to describe what has happened and been achieved or to explain what has happened and been achieved. The next division is between accountability and learning as competing purposes for evaluation. The Government Accountability Office in the United States, out of an audit tradition, incorporated evaluation perspectives for accountability purposes. The accountability involves being what's sometimes called a watchdog, watching how dollars are spent. Is money spent according to its commissioned purpose to achieve the expected results? Accountability is the driving force between independent evaluation offices. A lot of attention to making accountability work and the challenges of doing accountability in ways that are useful and appropriate. Adaptive accountability by Bert Perrin worked to move accountability from a very rigid, static stance to a way of coping with the changing turbulence and more challenging conditions of contemporary society. The joint evaluation of the Rwanda genocide response was a mutual accountability exercise for those who were engaged in providing development to Rwanda development after the genocide. And yet there are tensions between accountability and learning, between proving that a program is effective and improving it. And much of the tension in evaluation emerges between these competing purposes. Despite efforts to integrate them, they really are different purposes with different users, with different kinds of methods, asking different questions. And so balancing the accountability demands with learning demands is one of the things that differentiates kinds of evaluation. Evaluation for learning has a long tradition now in work around formative evaluations, which are aimed at improvement, learning organizations, the work on enhancing learning through evaluation, mastering formative assessments. In fact, the original distinction between formative and summative evaluation was between evaluation to improve and evaluation to make overall judgments of merit and worth. And so we continue to find that the effort to blend kinds of approaches, doing experimental impact analysis for program improvement that Laura Peck is working with, doing innovative approaches like appreciative inquiry to focus on creating an environment where learning can occur. Environments that have a high accountability demand create difficulties for people to be open about what's not working, for fear that they will be punished for not having achieved what they were supposed to achieve in the way they were supposed to achieve it. Appreciative inquiry creates an environment where people can look at what's working well, building on things like the success case method for learning, and looking at the very difficult issues that go on in learning under conditions of accountability. The mountain of accountability attempts to integrate accountability and learning with basic monitoring functions for accountability at the bottom of the mountain, with traditional program evaluation for impact in the middle, and accountability for learning, development, and adaptation at the top of the mountain. This is an example of trying to integrate what amount to often competing and divergent purposes for evaluation. And that has led to capacity building efforts where evaluation builds the capacity for learning into the evaluation operations themselves, and placing an emphasis on evaluative thinking as a major purpose of evaluation to help people think both in terms of accountability and learning and the tensions, but the ways of integrating those different things. And then we have, for evaluation itself, in the last revision of the standards for evaluation, a new accountability standard In a sense, what is good for the goose is good for the gander. What is good for programs and being accountable has become good for evaluation in being accountable. And so in the new Joint Committee standards around utility, feasibility, propriety, and accuracy, there is now an accountability standard for conducting meta-evaluations. Meta-evaluations are evaluations of evaluation for accountability. At the European Evaluation Society meeting in 2022, a major plenary addressed learning and accountability and the tensions and interactions between these two directions. But one of the things that separates evaluations is the relative emphasis, the priority given to evaluation for accountability or evaluation for learning, and dealing with the often major tensions between these diverse purposes. A fifth distinction that is important in evaluation is between those evaluations that aim for generalizable and standardized approaches and findings versus those that emphasize contextual, cultural, and situational variation. These involve two quite different directions for evaluation. One of the manias of our time is the search for best practices, finding out what is best and can be replicated around the world. Best practices suggest that culture and context don't matter, that we found something that works and you can use it anywhere. Scaling for impact, taking something that works in one place and taking it elsewhere, is a major interest of philanthropic donors and international development agencies. The standardization looks for validation of merit and worth through best practices, evidence-based practices, better practices, good practices, identifying bad practices, really bad practices, and really, really, really bad practices. But the emphasis is upon generalizability and coming up with standardized approaches for high fidelity evaluation to be sure that when those approaches that are considered of high value and merit and worth are replicated in the way in which they were evaluated. So this notion of scaling a model means that the emphasis for those who are seeking a model is on merit. Does the evaluation demonstrate that the program works? And worth is the idea that it has value for other places. That leads to what we call fidelity evaluation, determining that something is following standards. One of the most common sets of standards are the OECD DAC standards for evaluation itself that specify that evaluations should all address effectiveness, impact, relevance, coherence, sustainability, meaning continuity, and efficiency. This is a standardized approach to evaluation, regardless of context or place. It's a universal standardized set of criteria. The methodological hierarchy of evidence that privileges some kinds of methods, like randomized controlled trials, above all others, is a standardized approach to evaluation and to what is valuable in evaluation. Eleanor Chalimsky, in her attack on such thinking and the notion that one kind of method is superior to the others, in this case randomized controlled trials, said, "It is if the Department of Defense were to choose a weapon system without regard for the kind of war being fought, the character, history, and technological advancement of the enemy, or the strategic and tactical givens of the military campaign." And so in reaction against standardization, against uniformity, against one-size-fits-all, against best practices, we have seen emerge approaches that emphasize the diversity of evaluations and picking what kind of evaluation is appropriate to the situation. Eleanor Chalimsky pioneered the notion of strong evaluations that employ methods of analysis that are appropriate to the question, support the answer with evidence, document the assumptions, procedures, and modes of analysis, and rule out the competing evidence. Strong studies pose questions clearly, address them appropriately, and draw inferences commensurate with the power of the design and the availability, validity, and reliability of the data. Strength should not be equated with complexity, nor should strength be equated with the degree of statistical manipulation of data. This has led to culturally responsive forms of evaluation. Under the direction of Stafford Hood at the University of Illinois, the Center for Culturally Responsive Evaluation and Assessment has become a leading advocate of adapting evaluations to culture and context to make sure that it's not a one-size-fits-all, but that evaluators understand that programs and evaluations need to be adapted appropriately to the situation in which the evaluation is taking place. This important article talks about what it takes to do evaluation in communities and cultural contexts other than one's own. The Made in Africa movement that was conceptualized and given strength by Sully Gariba is about cultural context. Deborah Rogg, as president of the American Evaluation Association, made context the theme of her presidential conference and edited a volume on context as a framework for influence on evaluation practice. Realistic evaluation gives prime attention to cultural situations that affect how mechanisms of causality play out under different conditions. Real-world evaluation is about adapting evaluations to limited budgets, limited time, political constraints, data access limitations. Max-min evaluation is about how evaluations with minimum budgets can get maximum effects. These are all approaches about adapting evaluations to real-world diverse conditions rather than a standardized approach that treats both all situations similarly and that looks for best practice findings. In the latest edition of utilization-focused evaluation, the new 5th edition, there's a major emphasis on adaptation to situational factors and diverse intended users. And so that brings us to the issue of use and influence versus the focus on validity and rigor, prioritizing use versus accuracy, another major division. And that follows from what we've just been talking about. That is the division between seeking standardization, generalizability, uniformity in both evaluation and findings versus culturally responsive, contextually sensitive approaches. And the division between use and accuracy has followed and emerged out of that distinction between the relative uniformity and standardization versus contextual sensitivity, where use makes a priority of being sure that the findings and the processes fit situations, whereas accuracy places emphasis on methods and technical procedures across standards of rigor. So in the methodological rigor to achieve accuracy tradition is the important work by Rossi and Freeman, now carried forward with Mark Lipsey, on evaluation as a systematic approach applying social science methods to evaluation and defining evaluation as the application of social science methods to get the most rigorous results possible. The Joint Committee Standards on Evaluation actually debated and continues to debate the balance between a focus on utility, on practical feasibility, what can be done, on propriety concerns, on accuracy concerns, and how to be accountable in applying these diverse concerns. In the first Joint Committee on Evaluation Standards, and in the subsequent work, Dan Stufflebeam, who originated the committee and chaired it, has explained at length, and in the revisions and debates about the relationship between utility and accuracy, that he believes it's important that evaluation practice give first attention to utility. When there was a proposal to make accuracy the first of the standards and utility following that, he wrote, the proposed new sequencing of the categories of standards that places accuracy ahead of utility would, I believe, help return evaluation practice to the days, especially in the 60s and 70s, when evaluators produced many technically sound reports that only gathered dust on shelves. He talked about how the emphasis on use emerged, and those like Cronbach and himself who argued to make utility first in priority, that an evaluation's potential utility should be the first concern of the evaluator and constituents, because evaluators should not waste time and money in designing, conducting, and reporting studies that would not be used. The DAC quality standards for development evaluation include a standard for follow-up on use and learning to be sure that evaluations get used. Eleanor Chelimsky famously said, the purpose of an evaluation conditions the use that can be expected of it. And so we have to understand that. The 5 editions of utilization-focused evaluation over the last 50 years have led to adaptations of evaluation in developmental evaluation for social innovators under conditions of complexity, principles-focused evaluation for principles-focused leaders in principles-based programs, and blue marble evaluation to look at global systems change. All of these built around making utility the first and foremost criterion for quality evaluation. The CDC evaluation framework is built around the standards that incorporate utility, feasibility, propriety, and accuracy with a focus on enhancing use and sharing lessons. Marv Alkin's seminal work on evaluation use, and Carol Weiss's pioneering work on bringing attention to how knowledge and evaluation is used. She said, it does appear that evaluation research is most likely to affect decisions when the researcher accepts the values, assumptions, and objectives of the decision maker. Gene King's work on interactive evaluation practice to make evaluations useful to teachers and staff and beneficiaries. Outcome mapping was developed to make evaluation useful to multiple nonprofits and non-governmental organizations to work together to increase the usefulness of evaluation. Outcome harvesting, Ricardo Wilson Grau developed and carried on by his daughter, Carmen Wilson Grau, is aimed at making emergent and outcomes that emerge out of the work that can be identified after and as a program emerges, focused on utilization, ensuring that outcomes are not lost because the program only looks at predetermined and intentional outcomes and misses a lot of what actually went on that was important. This is driven by concern for use. Actionable evaluation aims at getting results that action can be taken on. The data viz movement and the stellar leadership of Stephanie Evergreen in making evaluations communicable and both accurately and usably is driven by the concern that people can interpret the data and make sense of it, a utilization concern, practical evaluation, creative evaluation, prospective evaluation, where evaluators are invited in to help design programs based upon what we've learned, means that, as Carol Weiss identified, people are concerned about both utilization and accuracy, apply both use tests and truth tests for evaluation impact, that sometimes the purpose is not action but enlightenment. Sometimes it's illuminating understandings of what's going on as a form of use. But the debate continues for those who believe that accuracy is the first priority, rigorous methods and findings, and that what happens to those findings is not the job of the evaluator to worry about. As Scriven said, evaluation is what it is, the determination of merit and worth, and what it is used for is another matter. That's the alternative perspective. And so the extent to which evaluations ought to be planned, designed, implemented, and reported with primary attention to use versus planned, designed, implemented, and reported with primary attention to methodological rigor is one of the enduring debates, with different evaluators having different priorities. Let me be clear that this is a matter of balance. Both groups are interested in use. Both groups are interested in quality data. It's a matter of emphasis that separates each of these directions. Utilization-focused evaluation emerged because those emphasizing the application of social science methods from the perspective of use were not paying enough attention to designing and attending the use from the beginning. The people working on methods want to be sure that they design the strongest studies methodologically and not be constrained by what stakeholders are going to do with those results. And so it's a matter of priority emphasis. But those different priorities lead in quite different directions for what questions are asked, how one works with stakeholders, what methods are used, how data are reported, and what happens to evaluate. So this brings us to a major emergent difference, both now and going forward, about where evaluation focuses its attention: project-level thinking versus systems thinking. The program evaluation as a unit of analysis tends to focus on programs and on projects. Those are efforts with clear goals and a logic model aimed at attaining those goals. There's a great deal of advice and guidance about how to do program evaluation. But in recent years, attention is turning to doing systems level evaluation. Systems evaluation involves looking at the complexities, interdependencies, perspectives, boundaries, and dynamics of systems. Bob Williams has been a leader in bringing this perspective into evaluation. And so it involves us in the principles for effective use of systems thinking in evaluation done by the Systems and Evaluation Topical Interest Group of the American Evaluation Association, working on systems. What all of this involves is moving from a project mentality where looking at goal attainment and program implementation to a very different focus on systems change and transformation, which involves then a major, quite important paradigm shift from a command and control perspective on planning and evaluation to a complexity perspective. The dominant way of engaging in planning and evaluation for the last 50 years is a command and control approach. Plan your work, work your plan. Make your plan work. Applied both to programs and to organizations and to evaluation. This is a sense that we need to know what to do and then do it. A lot of emphasis on careful planning and implementing the plan. Evaluability assessments have been developed to increase the planfulness and intentionality and relevance of evaluations. The Better Evaluation Rainbow Framework provides a framework for planning evaluations, defining what has to be done, framing evaluation, describing, understanding causes, synthesizing and reporting, a framework for engaging in evaluation. The Program Manager's Guide to Evaluation is a plan your work, work your plan kind of framework. Needs assessments are based upon figuring out what to do and then doing it. The 5-step MBO process is a planning, intentional process of knowing what to do, being clear. If you don't know what you're trying to do, you won't do it. That all contrasts with a new appreciation for complexity, in which there are emergent things that we hadn't anticipated, in which there are nonlinear effects. Small actions can have large reactions, where turbulent, uncertain, dynamic environments require a different kind of evaluation. And so developmental evaluation involves applying complexity concepts to enhance innovation and use. The developmental evaluation involves being able to adapt both programs and the evaluation as conditions change. The pandemic has led to widespread use of developmental evaluation because plans had to be pivoted. And so developmental evaluation became not just about innovation, but about adaptation. Johnny Morell has worked on evaluation in the face of uncertainty. At the Evaluation 2022 conference of the Eastern Evaluation Society, of the European Evaluation Society, there was a plenary on dealing with wicked problems and super wicked problems, difficult policy issues that don't have concrete, identifiable solutions, involve multiple sectors across silos and multiple actors. These take us into new directions in evaluation beyond program and project logic, to trying to be agile and responsive and adaptable. Now, another related tension is between evaluation as neutrally technical and evaluation as inherently values-based. This overlaps with some of the earlier tensions, but is sufficiently important to be identifiably separate. And the people who are highlighting the inherently values-based nature of all evaluations are reacting against the portrayal of evaluation as technically neutral. And so again, I'm emphasizing that these approaches are interconnected, relate to each other, are reactions to each other. They're not simply standalone approaches. Again, returning to Scriven's definition of evaluation as the process of determining merit, worth, and value of something, that merit and worth involve both did the program work and is it worthwhile taking to other places. The DAC criteria as standardized criteria that are treated as technical criteria, that are value-free, that the values are from what gets defined as effectiveness, impact, or relevance, but are not built into the criteria themselves. Although the critique of that thinking is that effectiveness, impact, relevance, efficiency are in fact industrial age criteria. They come out of the military and the industrial mindset. And so even there is an implicit infusion of a certain value framework and paradigm. The SIP model specified that you look at certain things, the content, context, input, and product of an evaluation, and that these questions were not values-based. The logic models are done with an emphasis on logic and not values. They describe how to achieve an outcome, but don't explicitly highlight what the values are that are involved in that program and its aspirations. The Kirkpatrick training model is a technical model for assessing training without attention to the content and values of that training. Evaluability assessment, likewise, treats evaluation as a technical matter of getting the logic and the outcomes well specified and working to be sure that the work is planned and the plan is followed. SMART goals are not explicitly value-based. That contrasts then with people working from a social justice perspective. A number of theories in evaluation and approaches that are calling for evaluations to be explicitly values-based, and that the way evaluations are conducted ought to contribute to social justice. Feminist evaluation is explicitly values-based. The LGBTQ evaluation work with Robin Miller and others is explicitly values-based in serving populations that have been marginalized. Human rights evaluation brings the values of human rights explicitly into evaluation. Donna Merton's transformative evaluation makes an explicit value commitment to include those voices that are not traditionally heard, and that thereby transforming both programs and evaluation. Advocacy evaluation supports the work of those who are trying to bring about change, and the value consistency and coherency between advocates and evaluators is an important factor in the success of advocacy evaluation. Appreciative evaluation emphasizes what values make for strong organizations and programs. And so this conflict and difference between whether evaluation is technical or values-based culminates in whether evaluation is a neutral onlooker or part of intervention. Evaluation viewed as generating information, or evaluation directly fomenting change. This is huge, and it is a major division brought about in part by our climate emergency, by the pandemic, by the increasing inequities in the world, by the increasing food insecurity in the world, and asking whether evaluation is going to be part of the solution or be part of the problem. And that when the house is on fire, all hands on deck. The question is, does evaluation serve the future best by staying outside the fray, or getting involved in the change and having what we call skin in the game? This is the final division I'll talk about. Things like results-based management then treat evaluation as neutral, as being technical. The 5-step MBO process, key performance indicators, strategic planning, strategic evaluation, the social psychology, and evaluation, understanding how people operate. These all bring disciplinary and technical understanding to evaluation, but don't make evaluation part of the change process. Thematic evaluation looks to create coherence and integration of separate program areas based upon technical, methodological, and substantive criteria, but to improve effectiveness of programs, not using evaluation as part of the change process. Likewise, with the impact measurement and management platform. This is a neutral platform for people to do technical work. And so it makes evaluation a knowledge generation activity, providing information to inform decision making, but carefully keeping evaluation out of making it part of the change process. This is part of the transdisciplinary vision of Scriven, that evaluation contributes to the knowledge and assessment of disciplines of all kinds and of social movements, but is not part of the social movement. The contrasting perspective views evaluation as an activist, interventionist, change-committed process. A special issue of the New Directions for Evaluation looked at the role of evaluation to incite change, especially around issues of racism. The work of Paulo Freire in the pedagogy of evaluation saw all education as a change process, and therefore all evaluation as part of a change process. Empowerment evaluation is explicitly oriented towards empowerment and being part of change. Transformative evaluation sees evaluation as a change-making function, as does feminist evaluation. Deliberative democratic evaluation makes evaluation a centerpiece of preserving and enhancing democracy, not just providing information into it, but in fact, the way in which evaluative thinking and deliberation around information is key to democracy, makes it part of the change process. The Equitable Evaluation Initiative, calling for all evaluations to address equity, makes the equity criterion part of changing how programs conceptualize what they are doing, and therefore how what they do is evaluated. Using standpoint theories to examine the privilege of the evaluation profession and individual evaluators. Critical race theory brought into evaluation. Indigenous evaluation, recognizing the historical need to decolonize evaluation, and the ways in which what we currently do in programming and planning is a result of colonialization and imperialization and the history of capitalism and slavery. And so these traditions are pushing evaluation to more explicitly deal with decolonizing and changing how society operates and thinks through engagement with these forms of evaluation. The creative evaluation and engagement of Andy Johnson and Nora Murphy Johnson is explicitly using creativity, artistic approaches as part of a creative change process. Blue Marble evaluation explicitly aims at making evaluation part of transforming evaluation to evaluate transformation, and emphasizing that everyone, including evaluators, have skin in the game. Nobody is outside the fray when it comes to the future of humanity and issues of sustainability. Sustainability evaluation, footprint evaluation, these make evaluation a part of the movement towards the future of humanity, as does visionary evaluation. And a major new direction in utilization-focused evaluation is to make equity and sustainability part of the explicit values-based menu and engaging in evaluation in a way that contributes to increased equity and sustainability. Not just through providing information, but through making the design and implementation of the evaluation part of the change process. Intergenerational evaluation is joining together experienced and elder evaluators with new, young, and emergent evaluators toward that change agenda. And it's one of the things that many younger evaluators bring into the work is a commitment to see evaluation as part of the change process. And so we've reviewed a lot of different evaluation approaches. There are, as I said, over 100 distinct approaches and counting, many of them still emerging to solve issues that they see not sufficiently addressed in the existing approaches. And that's how new approaches emerge. They look at what's going on, they look at what's going on in the world, they look at what evaluation has to offer, and say there's some problem or some issue that needs greater attention, and they suggest a way of handling that. And then we get new approaches. So what we've been looking at in the Evaluation Panorama Explained began with looking at what is evaluated and the location of the evaluator, and then we examined 10 competing perspectives about what to emphasize in evaluation that have led to distinct approaches. Those seeking definitive answers, both those honoring and seeking multiple perspectives through an evaluation. Those who emphasize evaluation as rendering independent judgment, and those who see evaluation as a chance to do co-creation and participatory judgment. Those who view evaluation as a descriptive enterprise, what happened, what goals were attained, what was implemented, and those who seek to explain why and how a program had effects. Those who emphasize accountability as a premier and priority in evaluation, and those who emphasize learning as the priority in evaluation and are trying to work out the tension between accountability and learning. Those who seek lessons and generalizations in findings and evaluation approaches versus those who seek to contextualize and make evaluation culturally responsive and culturally contextually sensitive. Those who are taking the traditional project focus versus the systems focus that has emerged in evaluation. And the validity focus around rigorous methods versus use focus as the priority, and resolving the tension between truth tests and use tests and how to engage in high-quality evaluations that get used. And so we have technical emphases in evaluation and values-driven emphases, and we culminated with the emphasis on evaluation as command and control versus dealing with complexity, and that led to knowledge generation evaluation versus evaluation as intervention. These 10 different tensions in evaluation have led to the multiplicity of approaches and models, with evaluators bringing forth different evaluations based on different values. So why are there so many kinds of evaluation? How did the choices get so complicated? Because evaluators come with different values, with different perspectives, with different priorities, as a part of different traditions in different communities, responding to different funders, responding to different societal needs, responding to different kinds of programs, and we get a panorama of many different kinds of evaluation.